Welcome to the Economics of Gender and Development MOOC. Today we are in the module 22 where we will be discussing about valuing women's work. We have so far seen that gender socialization divides the sphere of work in two distinct spheres. One is productive and paid work, and the other is unpaid domestic and care work. Historically, and we have already discussed this in detail, the men take care of productive and paid work, whereas the women mostly are engaged in the unpaid domestic care work. Accordingly, the labor market outcomes are very distinct and different. In fact, the labor market outcomes are directly proportional to the time spent in productive and paid work. All the indicators and data are related to productive and paid works. And therefore, when we see the indicators across male and female labor force participation rates and other indicators, we see that there is a huge gap between the indicators of men and women, where men has always higher values than the females. Basically, the unequal division of labor between men and women in these two spheres results in unequal labor market outcomes. That means that the inequality that we observe in the labor market and labor market outcomes are actually result of this unequal division of labor, where the men are engaged mostly in paid and productive work, whereas women are engaged mostly in unpaid domestic and care work. And therefore, most of the time, women's contribution to domestic unpaid care work, even though it is more than the men, women's contributions goes unrecognized and undervalued. So we normally do not recognize the work done by women, whereas whatever we measure, whatever we take into consideration, belong basically to men. And that gives us the basic distinction between men's work and women's work, where men's values are always higher than the women. All right. So that's the kind of setup that we have. Now, in the very first place, we need to understand that what is the difference between these two spheres, that how much time men spend in productive work and unproductive care, this thing, and what is the time spent by women in the unpaid domestic and care work. Now, we can rely on different surveys, and different countries are having different kinds of surveys. The one of the surveys that we use normally in India relates to time use survey by National Sample Survey Organization. The most recent data that belongs to National Sample Survey Organization is from 2024. And if we look at the time use survey of NSSO, that is 2024 round, we will see that unpaid domestic work, that is the household chores performed by women, are almost 3 times the domestic work done by men. And if you look at the figures, then we will see that on an average in India, the women spend 289 minutes per day, which is roughly close to 4.8 hours in domestic work, and then which is the figure for which the men is actually 88 minutes per day, which is roughly 1.5 hours. And also, if we look at the participation rate, then also we will see that there is a difference between the women's participation and men's participation. Almost 84% of women are participating in unpaid domestic work, whereas the percentage for men participation is only just 45-46%. All right. So that's the time use survey tells us. If we look at the caregiving work, that is looking after children, elderly, sick persons in the household, Here also, women spend more time than men. If we look at the data of NSSO 2024, then we will see that women spend 337 minutes per day, which is close to 2.3 hours, in the unpaid caregiving work, compared to that of men, which is close to 75 minutes per day, which is 1.3 hours. Participation is also high for women, which is 41%, and men participation is 21.4%. All right. And if we combine unpaid and care work, then we will find that the women actually spend much more time than men. On an average, we see that women average time that is spent by women on unpaid domestic care work is about 7 hours, whereas it is men, it is for about 2.7 hours. So it clearly states that women do most of the domestic and care work, and it is roughly about 2.6 times or 3 times the time spent by men in the domestic work and care work. And most interestingly, if we look at the gap between the men and women's time in the unpaid domestic and care work, it shows that it is almost remains same. It is actually persistent over the period, despite minor changes. And if we can compare it with the 2019 NSSO round of time use survey, and then it is clear that there is hardly any change in the time spent, gap between the women's time and the men's time in unpaid domestic care work. All right. So that's the situation in India. If we look at the global data sets on time use surveys coming from UN Women, OECD, and etc., then also this kind of gap is the persistent and then clear. We see that global average gender gap across countries with time use surveys is about, it talks about that women spend almost 2.5 times more hours daily on unpaid care and domestic work relative to men. If we look at the UN Women's estimates, it is about 2.8 hours more per day. If we look at the others in global reports, it is revealing that about 76% of the care work is done by the women globally, which is again more, about 3 times the men spend on these works. And then key conclusion from time use comparison across countries, across places, is that gender gap is almost same across the countries, whether it is developed or underdeveloped, and it is persisting over time. So it actually suggests that there is a strong stereotype regarding gendered division of work. For instance, suppose global average gap is 2.5 times. OECD countries, which are mostly developed countries, it is 2 times. India is about 2.53 times. So it is, whether it is India, OECD, or global average, the gap remains the same, that women spend more time in the care work, unpaid domestic care work, or the household work, and then it comes in as a hindrance in their participation in the productive work. All right. We need to understand, in the second part, we need to understand that what is the significance of this unpaid care and domestic work. Even though it is outside the GDP, it is not counted in the GDP. We must understand that these unpaid care and domestic work actually sustains the labor market, the market for goods and services, and also it helps to reproduce the labor socially. And if you look at the classical political economy, we will see that classical political economy implicitly recognizes that workers must be maintained and reproduced. You need to have a particular labor class to work on and over capital to produce the things. So therefore, they believe that unpaid work acts as a hidden subsidy to capitalism by reproducing labor power outside the market. So you do not come into direct understanding of the system, but it is outside the system, but still is useful and it is facilitating the production in the productive sphere. All right, so that's the understanding of the classical political economy. If we look at the Marxist socialist perspective, then it will hold that the domestic labor is a part of social reproduction of capitalism. Women's unpaid work sustains both patriarchy as well as capitalism. So they believe that actually this is the means by which the both patriarchy and capitalism survives. All right, and then unpaid care work is not outside the economy, but it is structurally necessary to capitalist production system. So it's not something which is separate, but it is very much part of it. All right, that's the understanding of the Marxist socialist the perspective. Feminist economics perspective holds that mainstream economics wrongly treats unpaid work as non-economic, whereas they believe that production and markets cannot function without household reproducing the labor and the workers. Right? So therefore it is a very much integral to the system, even though it is not recognized, even though it is not taken into consideration, but it is very much part of the system as a whole. It gives me a kind of a the idea that we can refer to the one very interesting book by Catherine Markell. The title is very provocative, and the title suggests that who cooked Adam Smith's dinner. Adam Smith, we know, is a father of economics, and then she writes a book asking this very provocative question, that if the market runs on the self-interest, then who cooked Adam Smith's dinner? The answer is his mother, the unpaid care work that economics ignored. The Markell shows that the markets always rest on a hidden domestic economy that sustains workers and the production. And then her main argument is that humans are not independent, rational atoms, but are interdependent beings, and then where care, empathy, and social relations are as fundamental as self-interest. So therefore, what she suggests is that invisible hand needs an invisible care economy. So what we call invisible hand is also relates to invisible care economy, based on which we have the production and markets and other economic spheres running and growing. All right. So that's the kind of understanding that we must have. Now the third part relates to the different approaches of valuing unpaid work. How do you value unpaid work? First of all, till now, unpaid work is not a part of your national accounting. It is not a part of your GDP because it is not traded in the market directly. You do not have a value for which can be accommodated within the national accounting system. However, there are certain recognitions at the international level. For instance, suppose SDG 5 talks about gender equality, and Target 5.4 specifically calls for recognizing and valuing unpaid care and domestic work. All right. So there is a growing concern, there is a growing demand, and there is a growing recognition for this kind of work. So therefore, even though it is not part of GDP as of now, there are instances and there are attempts at how to value the unpaid care work, unpaid domestic work performed mostly by women. If we look at the different methods, then we have three basic steps. One, we need to make women's work visible, that we have to find out how much of work has been done by the women. Then we will try to estimate the economic contribution of it, and then we have to have a policy on care, infrastructure, and gender equality. So there are three distinct steps with which we have to approach the question of valuing unpaid work. Broadly, we have two different approaches of valuing the work, that is unpaid work. One is called input-based methods, where we will try to value time spent on these works by women. And the other one is the output-based method. We will try to value what is being produced by women at the household level, at the care level. All right. So there are two approaches. One is called input-based approach, and other one is called output-based approach. All right. Now let me explain the input-based approaches. The input-based approach, in principle, calculate value by multiplying the time spent on unpaid work with a given wage rate. All right. We have two approaches within this broad framework. One is called opportunity cost method. Opportunity cost method means that we have to value the unpaid work using a wage of a woman who could earn in the labor market. All right. For instance, suppose if you want to try to value women's work, then we have to multiply time spent by women on an activity and the potential wage. For instance, suppose if a woman with a potential earning of 400 rupees per hour spends 5 hours of care work, then obviously it will be around 2000 per day. All right. So 5 hours is your time, and then 400 per hour is your potential wage rate, prevailing wage rate, and then we will try to find out the value by applying the opportunity cost method, that what is the cost she is foregoing for performing household and domestic care work. Now, what is the significance? It captures the loss of labor market income. It highlights the economic penalty of the care burden. It is hugely useful for analyzing gender and wage inequality. However, it has got certain limitations. For instance, suppose it overvalues work of highly educated women, it undervalues work of poorer women, it reflects the labor market inequality, and so on and so forth. So it is easy, quite simplified, it is very clear, direct, but it has got certain limitations. So opportunity cost method is one, but it has got certain limitations. The other input-based method is called replacement cost method. In the replacement cost method, what we do, we try to value unpaid work at the cost of hiring someone to perform the same work. For instance, suppose if you are cooking, then what will be done, that you have to value the rate at which probably you will be have a professional cook to do the same thing. We have, within this broad framework, we have two variations. One is called generalist replacement method, where we have a fixed value for all and then we apply for all kinds of work. And then other one is called specialist replacement cost, where each activity are valued at the relevant wages. That means, suppose if you want to value cooking, then you have to give it a professional rate of cooking. Cleaning, you have to get a professional cleaner's wage, and so on and so forth. So the replacement cost basically, it tries to value the work by imputing and then considering that somebody else professionally is doing the same thing, and what is the cost that we have to pay. So that's called the replacement cost method. And then note that both these the opportunity cost and the replacement cost method are input-based method, because it tries to calculate the time spent and then try to value by given wage rate, whether it is generalist, specialist, or a single value, but it has got the value multiplied by time. So time is the input, and then we use this input-based method. On the other hand, we have the output-based method. What is the output-based method? In principle, what we do, we try to estimate in output-based method the market value of the goods and services produced, not just time. For instance, suppose we can have household production method. What we will do, we will try to use the market price of equivalent goods and services. Suppose if you want to value the cooking, then we will try to value the home cooked meal at the cost of the restaurant meal. We have to value the child care services valued at a private daycare facility fees, and so on and so forth. So therefore, the same thing, if you want to do it professionally, the value of that particular output will be imputed, and that is called household production method. All right. So therefore, there are two methods. One is called the input method, and other one is called output method. In the input, we account for time spent and then multiplied by the given wages, whereas we will try to value the activity in terms of the finished products, finished services valued at the market rate. So that is the output method. Then of course, then if we try to value the women's services, then what is the purpose of it? The purpose is to somehow integrate the unpaid work, value of the unpaid work, into the macroeconomic framework. And then that is called extended national account approaches. That if we want to make it a part of national accounting system, then it is called extended national accounting approach. For instance, suppose UN recommends the satellite account approach, where what we do, we create a parallel national account that includes unpaid work also. It is used by India, in some instances Mexico, Australia, South Africa, even though it is not a part of official GDP, but makes women's contribution visible. It counts the women's contribution. It includes 3 basic steps. It will try to use the time use survey, apply the replacement cost wages, and then estimate as a percentage of GDP. Whole estimate is reflected as a percentage of GDP. And if we look at the data all around, then we will see that unpaid care work is about ranges from 20% to 60% of GDP. It can be 20%, it can be as high as 60% of GDP. So this is an extremely important component of the women's work, so that women get recognized that they are doing and contribution economically also. We can also have a broader framework of accounting the women's work as a well-being or capability valuation approach. It is used in mostly the feminist approaches or human development frameworks, where we try to value unpaid care work not only in terms of money, but in terms of human well-being also. We will try to look at the health outcomes, we will try to look at the child development, we will try to look at the social contribution, social cohesions, etc., and so on and so forth. Right? So what is the significance of this, the capability valuation approach or well-being valuation approach? It shows that care work produces social value beyond market prices. It's not only the market prices that is important, but it is more about the much more than the market prices. It is about the social value of the care work and domestic work. However, there are certain limitations that it is very difficult to quantify, and also it is therefore mostly done with a qualitative kind of surveys. All right. So this is what is, in a nutshell, is all about. That you have the different approaches, and this is how it is done. So this table shows the summary of the different methods that we have discussed. That we have opportunity cost method, we have replacement cost method, generalist and specialist, we have the household production method, we have the satellite accounts, and we have the capability approach. Each of these things are given as a different measurements, and then their strength and weaknesses. So if you look at, suppose, opportunity cost, it is the potential earning lost. Replacement cost, cost of hiring domestic workers, professional domestic workers. If we have the replacement cost specialist, cost of professionals for each of the tasks taken separately with their specific wages. Household production, try to value the outputs in terms of market value. Satellite accounts, it tries to get national level valuation, and capability approach goes beyond the monetary term and then goes to the valuing social and well-being, of the activities. And then similarly, you have the strength and weaknesses shown in this table. So basically, what is the understanding of this module? That let us try to conclude and sum up in this discussion. The first point that we need to understand, that gender socialization recreates the gender division of labor in 2 spheres: productive and paid work, and unpaid domestic and care work. The second, that this division sustains production and market, but remains grossly invisible and unrecognized. Consequently, the women's work and contribution goes unrecognized and undervalued. Increasingly, therefore, there are attempts at recognizing and valuing women's work, and SDG 5 particularly makes an explicit reference and commitment to this. Broadly, there are 2 approaches of valuing women's work. One is input-based method, where we consider the time spent by women and then try to multiply by the given wage rate for that particular time spent. And output-based method, where we'll try to value the services and final services or goods produced at the home front at the market value. And various estimates show that women's contribution to GDP can range from 20 to 60% of GDP in different countries. It can be as low as 20% and as high as 60% of GDP in different countries. Even though there are the recognitions, attempts are also there to make a part of the national accounting, but still it is not achieved. And this highlights in a sense that why the gender differences still persist, that it is not about the recognition only, but it is also to be considered formally that the women's contribution in the labor market, women contribution in the production spheres. So the main idea we should try to take from today's discussion is that this division between the productive and the unproductive or so-called domestic and care work is very artificial one. It is a result of gender division of labor, but nonetheless it supplements each other. That therefore focusing on only one part does not give you a full recognition to the kind of contribution coming from the women, and there is a need for recognizing women contribution to a greater extent. And we have discussed this thing in terms of different valuation methods, and then we use these two methods, input based or output based method, to value women's work. As we progress in this course, we will try to use some of these techniques, and we will find the ways in recognizing and valuing women's work in more detail. So with this, we conclude for today's module. Thank you very much.